And greetings to you, thrill seekers and conversationalists all across the fruited plain. This is not the Rush Limbaugh Show, but sometimes I can't help myself. I have to do a little bit of a tribute to the greatest of all time, because he was one of the most influential figures in my life, and because I'm sitting behind a microphone. It is not golden, and it never will be, but it is mine, so I'm going to do with it what I can. This is, in fact, the Caleb Landis Show, the show where we do accuracy and believe in accountability. A little more on that later. Got my Steelers hat on today because the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback Aaron Rodgers recently went on the Pat McAfee show and ripped Dr. Anthony Fauci a new caboose opening, if you know what I'm referring to. One which he, well, I don't know if he needed it, but he definitely deserved. And that's my quarterback, right? I found it's not often that you find yourself identifying with athletes' spoken opinions or accomplishments off the field. Half the time, you have to just I have to try to avoid the athletes that I enjoy following. I have to try to avoid their social media and avoid any news about them that I can find, because their off-field stuff is humiliating. But in this case, I loved what Aaron Rodgers had to say off the field, and we will actually get into a lot more of Anthony Fauci and his recent testimony before Congress in today's show. But before we get there, a bit of a dose of reality, like we'd like to do every week. Another one of the many things to be happy about from Trump 2.0. Now, I should point out, when I talk about these Trump wins, that I am not objective, right? I want Trump to succeed. That's fair to say. It's accurate. But when you think about that, also consider the fact that the people that are criticizing him want him to fail, including the people who claim to be on the right, and who claim to be betrayed by Trump, because these people see their best and easiest path to political power, influence, and money through failure of Trump 2.0. So none of us are very objective, I find, when it comes to Donald Trump. However, numbers are pretty objective, and these are exactly accurate for the second month in a row. ICE broke a record in a good way. ICE in the month of July broke their own record for illegal alien arrests in a single month. Back in June, they had set the record at 43,000. This month, they broke it again. 51,000 illegal aliens arrested in July alone. Hat tip Eric Doherty on X for these numbers. Once again, I'm going to suggest a few things that you do in response to the reality that I just shared with you. That's what we do here on this show. I share with you the reality, and I suggest some responses to that reality. This time, I suggest, again, that you use AI, whichever one you want, to look for news and to look into the accuracy of news stories. We've talked about this before. I'm going to keep talking about it because it's extremely important. In media, you make money by people being able, by getting people to consume your content. That does not necessarily translate to you making money by telling people the truth. In fact, many times just the opposite is the case. However, AI has a different system of metrics, I guess, because for AI to be successful, you have to get the facts straight. AI, by its very definition, is a fact-finding tool, right? And for AI to exist at all, it has to be accurate. If an AI is burping up narratives instead of facts, it will quickly get caught, and it will not be used. It's like a dictionary that gives you propaganda, right? It would never sell, and therefore it would never be published. So there is less of an opportunity for bias when you use AI. as a news source and as a way to assess how accurate your more traditional news sources are being. I prefer Grok, but you can use whichever one you want. So, taking AI with you, continue to look for people, as we've said, look for people who are telling the truth, especially on alternative media. I recognize that X can be a great place for liars, and it often is because it's a free speech platform, right? But it is also a great place for truth and for accuracy. And Eric Doherty, the gentleman that I just mentioned, who I got these numbers from on the ICE arrest record, is a great place for accuracy. So I would recommend you get on X and you follow him at Eric, ERICL, Daugh, DAUGH. ERICLDAUGH. Eric Doherty on X. When you get the facts, you can understand reality. And when you understand reality, you will start to see a lot of holes in the nothing is happening narrative. So, what has been happening? Well, one of the things that everybody has been talking about recently, if you're involved in the political world at all, is the testimony of Anthony Fauci on Capitol Hill, who, of course, still goes by Dr. Anthony Fauci, though I'm not sure he should. He was the cornerstone, the figurehead, the standard bearer for all of the COVID lockdown measures. There are some people who have tried, including Fauci, since COVID in 2020, to sort of obfuscate how pro-lockdown Anthony Fauci was. Those people have largely since been dismissed from public, thought process. We all know, because we all just lived it. 6 years ago, it's not that long ago. Anthony Fauci was the crusader, the caped crusader for all of the COVID lockdown measures. He was being asked to testify on a lot of suspicious stuff in Congress, on Capitol Hill recently, and he pled the Fifth Amendment 111 times during his testimony. He has a presidential pardon, either from Joe Biden or from Joe Biden's, staffers who use the auto pens to print pardons. I don't know. Fact of the matter is he has a presidential pardon. So it's unlikely that he is going to be able to be prosecuted in any way, at least on the federal level. So he is aware of that fact. His lawyers are aware of that fact. So when he's called before Congress to testify, the only thing that he can do to get himself into legal trouble is to lie again, lie now before Congress. So rather than doing that, he decided to say nothing at all and plead the Fifth Amendment 111 times. Many of us are pulling our hair out, or would be if we had any. Maybe some of us are pulling our beards out, because we remember what Anthony Fauci did, what he did to the country as a whole and to individuals all over the country. We remember what those lockdowns, not only what they were like, but what they did to us. I get tired of reviewing these things because they're painful memories for me personally. But you remember, and many of you experienced, spending a lifetime building a business, maybe even taking on some employees who were counting on you, right, for their livelihood, whose families were depending on you for their paychecks, being told that your businesses were not essential and that you had to shut down. Many of you were never able to reopen, while favorites of the powers that be in your area continue to stay open. You remember what it was like being told, get an experimental vaccine or lose your job. Some of you have suffered the health effects or know those who have suffered the health effects from that vaccine. All of you remember the emotional stress, right? That's something that's supposed to matter to the left, of being forced to take a medication that you did not trust. We all remember when we were told that we couldn't go to church, or how many people could come to our Thanksgiving and Christmas family get-togethers, or what time of night we could go out, or get the shot and then you can go out of doors, right? And we certainly remember what it was like when the sickest and most at risk among us were shoved into nursing homes to come into immediate proximity with the people who were most vulnerable from COVID, being our seniors. This happened in New York, and this happened in Pennsylvania, where I live. And we remember not being able to be with those who we love and who loved us when it was most needed, whether it was at the hospital bed or the funeral, the burial of a loved one, as was the case in my life. And we're still dealing with the consequences of this every day. The psychological impacts on kids and young people who were forced to wear masks and be in groups of people who were wearing masks when they were allowed to go back to school at all. I taught at a small Christian school for the 4 years immediately following the COVID lockdowns. And you had to teach the COVID kids differently. And you had to handle the COVID kids differently because their education was more than a year behind. And their psychological development, the anxiety that these kids dealt with was through the roof. It was a universal, verdict of all the folks that I taught with who taught prior to COVID. And I saw the psychological damage and the stunted educational development for myself. We're also still struggling with the fact that we now cannot trust our healthcare professionals. Fauci told us over and over and over again, screw your eyeballs, screw your instincts, screw your evidence that you can see or look into yourself, and trust me, because I represent the experts. I am the science. He said that. Trust the science. Who do we trust now? Now that we know that these people have been lying to us. I don't know how to treat my kids, nasal inflammation anymore because I have no idea if I can trust my doctors or not. That is a major societal harm, damage, and a lot of it is Dr. Fauci's fault, personally. So we're pulling our hair out, trying to come to terms with the fact that he's probably not going to be prosecuted like we would like to see, right? He's up there on Capitol Hill. These are the people who are supposed to have the power to hold him accountable, and they can't even make him speak. It's frustrating to no end, and we're grappling, many of us as Americans are grappling with the question, will there be accountability for Anthony Fauci? Thankfully, I have the answer. And the answer is absolutely 100% certainty, yes. The only question is how and when. Let me explain to you what I mean. We still have some tools within our arsenal right now that we can appropriately and legally hold Dr. Fauci accountable. Okay? Now, before we go any further with this, I am not suggesting vigilantism, and I am not suggesting anything immediately, remotely resembling a lynch mob, right? We do not get to enact the justice that we want just because we as citizens are convinced that it is justice. That is not how we work as a society. We have a legal process, and you better be thankful that we do. Because if we don't, it hurts you as much as it hurts the people who you want to give justice to. I am talking nonviolence. I am talking legal means only. All right? But we still have some tools at our disposal, right? One, this is going to sound a little rude, but one that we have is ridicule and disdain and shame. I call it the "you're done, never again" approach. It appears from his diary that Dr. Fauci was very, very pleased and very, very motivated by fame and by his newfound power. He liked being God, and he was for quite some time. So we can hold him accountable by simply not letting him be God anymore. I think it's morally justifiable to ridicule this man. In fact, I would recommend it, because ridicule is an appropriate response to someone in his shoes, someone with his ego, someone with his crimes. It is a way within your power to make him smart a little bit for what he has done. He should be embarrassed. I'm not opposed to embarrassing him with spoken words, right? But a lot more important than that is the disdain and shame part, right? And what I mean by that is just stop listening to the jerk, right? Don't underestimate how frustrated someone like that could become if they become irrelevant or if they feel irrelevant, right? So the next time they try a pandemic, and they will, you can ignore Fauci or any of Fauci's suggestions. In fact, some of you need to ignore Fauci's suggestions now. I still see some of you wearing masks, right? That doesn't help you. It doesn't help anybody else. But when you live your life free of his influence, you've taken his power away. And that is something that the kind of person that I believe Anthony Fauci is not going to enjoy. And that's legitimate. You can live free of the tyrant. And living free of the tyrant is, in some sense, revenge, justice upon the tyrant. Just getting out from under his yoke. Camera Kid is back there mouthing "Free Bird," the song. That's not a bad response, right? Go do America. And you kind of make liberals in general unhappy just by living free, right? That is within your power to do. Obviously, the goal is not to make them unhappy. The goal is to build a better life for yourself. But that is a measure of justice that you can have on this man who doesn't appear to be being held accountable right now. Live free. Ignore him. Number 2 is political activism and involvement. There are still political prosecutorial means that we may be able to pursue to bring this man to justice in the traditional sense, right? It's possible that there are some things that the states could prosecute, that he has violated state laws. And a state can convict you for a crime regardless of a presidential pardon. But for that to happen, you'd have to have a Republican trifecta, meaning a Republican governor and complete Republican control of state legislature, I assume. And you'd have to have maybe not a Republican legislature. Maybe there'd be ways around it. I'm not sure. To be honest, I don't know how all state governments work. But I do know that you'd have to have the right sort of people in the right sort of positions. DEA's office, juries, and prosecutors' offices. And probably a Republican governor, at least. And the right kinds of Republicans, not even necessarily Republicans, but justice-minded people in offices elected and appointed throughout your state. And the only way to get that is to elect enough of those people. The only way to get that is for the people who are already like that or minded that way, that are Republicans, that are justice-focused, to be more involved in politics than they currently are. Now, I am not asking everybody to become a professional political activist like me. I'm not even asking everybody to, knock doors or whatever. But there is an opportunity for you to seek justice for what Anthony Fauci did by taking the next step in your political involvement. And not to be partisan about it, because I know there's a lot of nonpartisan ire at what Dr. Fauci did, but you're going to have to vote for Republicans, and you're going to have to vote for the right kind of Republicans. We know that the any Democrat, with very few exceptions, is going to kind of hail Fauci as a hero. That's what they did back then. I know, we saw it. It was the Democrat politicians who gave Fauci so much power, even when many Republican politicians were starting to realize that this was a problem. So you're going to have to take you may want to consider taking your next step, politically speaking. And if you do, it's going to have to be on the Republican side. It's going to have to be a step to the left. We can achieve never a step to the right. Yes, a step to the right. Sorry. We can achieve never again, right? We can make sure that it doesn't happen. And we can enact a bit of justice from our righteous anger with Anthony Fauci by voting against Democrats this November 3rd. I know that sounds a little simplistic, but it is accurate. Remember, it was the Democrats who gave him the full extent of his power in the first place. I know that the lockdown started during the Trump presidency, right? But within a couple of weeks, President Trump began to suggest rolling backwards. And soon, what lockdowns he did by, proclamation or whatever put in place, he removed those. It was the Democrat governors and the people who were listening to the Democrat governors who continued to push and enforce Fauci's regime long after Republican governors started to pull back. There were some Republicans who went along with it too. That's why I say we need to elect the right kind of Republicans. Let's look at Pennsylvania, where I live, for an example. The guy who locked us down, and he was one of the worst in the country, was our then governor, Tom Wolf. He's a Democrat. Our current governor, Josh Shapiro, was his attorney general, meaning he was one of the top enforcement officials for the lockdown, for Fauci's draconian, heartless, blood-sucking regime. And our current governor is up for re-election right now in Pennsylvania. This November 3rd, you can vote against Fauci and that COVID mess by voting against Josh Shapiro. And as an added bonus, you do vote against Josh Shapiro, you will end up with a very competent civilian and military leader in the Republican candidate, Stacey Garrity. Maybe that's your next step of political involvement. Maybe you don't vote. Maybe you need to register to vote. Maybe you vote in presidential elections only. This is a midterm, halfway between the last presidential election and the next one. It is this November 3rd. So maybe your next political step is voting against the party that gave Fauci so much power. But you can go, whatever your next step is, you can have an impact there. You can take away from the entire Democrat, socialist, authoritarian, communist, ugly, inhuman, dark and demonic monster that we call the American left. Simply by taking that next political step, you can take away from them, from that, what they desire most. You can take away their power. And that's ultimately what the COVID lockdowns were about, power. It was the first time in my life that I had a personal encounter with the power-hungry dictator desire on the American left. It had a big part in me, that the COVID lockdowns were a big motivation in me taking my next political step. And the next one after that, I became a volunteer, and then I became full-time in this political world. You can do the same thing. How? Well, start by registering to vote. Or, if you already registered, change your party affiliation to Republican. Then vote. Then you can pursue all kinds of other ways to get involved, right? Maybe you are a content creator. Well, and you're right in the exact space. Create a content, start a podcast that communicates the truth. Do you have friends? Have you ever tried telling them the truth about politics? Not every friend wants to have that conversation. I get that. Maybe you have relationships like that in your life where you could. That's a huge way to take the next step. There are practical, political, volunteering avenues outside of door knocking. Don't get me wrong. We need door knockers. Maybe that's your next step. But maybe you're not a door knocker. Don't just think that I'm not a door knocker, so I can't help in politics. Don't think that way. Do you have a smartphone? Download the Early Vote Action app. You can text inactive voters in Pennsylvania and encourage them to sign back up to vote so that hopefully they will vote this November. You can text specific lists in specific areas across the state, reaching people, texting on your phone. You can do phone calls on your phone. You can write postcards to these lists, completely non-invasive, right? Or you can follow on my social media, see where I'm going to be with the Republican Party or Early Vote Action, and help us at one of these tables, these booths where you talk to people about these issues. That is a great non-threatening way to get started, right? Because you can come and watch the volunteers and watch me do it. You don't have to say anything for that whole first shift if you don't want to. Just watch. And it's not aggressive. It's not nasty. It's not combative usually because, they're walking by your booth at the fair. So you start or attempt to start the conversation with them. And if they're not interested, they just keep walking, right? No harm, no foul. There are so many ways for you to take your next step, and it can make so much of a difference. Even just one person. My boss, Scott Pressler, is a great example of this. If you follow Scott Pressler or politics on social media, you have heard that within this last week, the active voter registration lead for Democrats shrunk from over 50,000 to 25,811 after one purge of bad voter registrations in Pennsylvania. And this came within days of my boss, Scott Pressler, going to Philadelphia and looking at their non-juror lists to see how many people who are not qualified to be registered to vote or to be jurors because of their citizenship status are slipping through the cracks. And within days of him publishing this investigation of his in Philadelphia, more than 30,000 bad registrations were removed from the Pennsylvania registration rolls. To put that in perspective, in 2020, Biden won Pennsylvania by 18,000 votes. Wait, no, I'm wrong. 81. I got them switched. 81,000 votes. That's a big chunk. That's a big chunk of the Democrat margin in 2020 in one purge that have just gone, right? So the 25,811 is the smallest gap between Democrats and Republicans among active voters in modern Pennsylvania history. And Scott is essentially the only person working on this, at least publicly, at the national level, right? One person took their next step. Scott took their next step. And look what it has become. It has become a national movement that is making ripples all across the country, making waves all across the country. Now, obviously, you're not Scott Pressler. Neither you nor I have the energy or the charisma or the vision to do what he has done. But you do have yourself, right? And you do have the yourself that you could become if you take the next step. Contact me on Facebook. Contact me on X. I'll get you started. Ultimately, though, the political side of accountability is not the ultimate answer that we are looking for here, right? It would be great if Fauci could get prosecuted, or at least Fauci and people like him could lose their power. And there are things that we can and should do to push toward that end. But none of those are enough for me to guarantee unequivocally, as I did at the beginning of the show, that Dr. Fauci will be held accountable for his crimes against humanity. But there is a court in which Dr. Fauci will be held accountable for his crimes against humanity. And that court will be exactly accurate. That court will know if his crimes were less than what you and I think, or more than what you and I think. And that court will judge him and those who assisted him accordingly. It is the same court, or at least the same judge, that you and I will stand before someday when our life here on earth is over. That is why one of the reasons why I am so thankful for God and for what God tells us about the end of time and the end of our lives. God states very clearly, multiple times throughout the Bible, that there is no crime that will go unpunished. And that is both terrifying for us, but it is also such a comfort and such a relief for us. I would lose my mind if I believed that the only chance that we had for justice was human justice taking place in this life. Because most of the time it doesn't. But that's not the end of the story. Anthony Fauci will answer for everything that he has done to God. So will I. Which is why I'm so thankful for Jesus, right? Because I've never done anything as abhorrent as Anthony Fauci. But that's easy for me to say, right? And I have done things that I know I should not have done. Some of them I'm very ashamed of, right? But Jesus took away that sin when that guilt when he died on the cross. He bled his blood, was buried, and came back to life again to pay for that and to give me pay for that unrightness and to give me his rightness, so that when I stand before God, he sees someone as perfect as Jesus. In fact, he sees Jesus' perfectness. So I don't have to worry when I stand before that judge, because I'm already judged perfect and I'm already forgiven because my sins were already paid for. As far as I know, Anthony Fauci does not have that forgiveness. As far as I know, when Anthony Fauci stands before God, and that will be in God's timing, by the way, not mine. Non-violent and peaceful, remember? When Anthony Fauci stands before God, he will answer for every one of those broken livelihoods and destroyed dreams. He will answer for every one of the damaged children that his selfishness has played a large part in creating. He will answer for the loneliness. He will answer for the heartbreak. He will answer for the hardship and evil that he personally, many times, inflicted on millions of people. Now, as a Christian, my ultimate prayer, and I say this before God in honesty and sincerity, my ultimate prayer is that he does find that forgiveness. Even though part of me wants him to be punished no matter what. That's the part of me that I am not choosing to listen to because it doesn't reflect who Jesus is. But I can still be grateful to a God who will enact justice if the wicked person doesn't choose to accept forgiveness. Anthony Fauci will receive accountability, as will the rest of us. And for Fauci's sake, as well as my own, I am thankful for the justice and forgiveness, justification and justice that is found in Jesus Christ. Thanks for listening today. If you want to take that next step in politics, get in touch with me. If you appreciate this show, enjoy the show, please watch it, obviously. You can find it on Rumble, Facebook, and YouTube, but share it, like it, subscribe to the channels, and talk about it. Comment on the pages. Point it out to people, right? That definitely helps spread the message. We appreciate you being here, and I will see you next time.